till now we have covered what do you mean by exception. So I hope that all of you have an idea about what is the meaning of exception, why do we need exception handling, right? So what is default exception handler? So all these things we have covered so far. And in our last lecture, we have started our new topic, that is our try and catch block. So you know that what is the need of try and catch block, because till now we are getting an exception, but still we are not able to handle those exceptions. Because whenever we are not able to handle our exception, then what will happen? We will we will terminate our program abnormally, and we don't want this thing. Okay, we never want that we should terminate our program abnormally. So like here in some examples I have shown you, like we just want to execute our program and we just want to terminate our program normally, but just because of this exception, and I am not handling this exception, right? So just because of that, I will not be able to execute whatever the statements that are there after my this exception, where I'm basically getting that particular exception. Remember. So that is why, in order to sort out that is the main problem. And you can see over there, we are able to see this output like till your Noida, but we are not able to see this statement. And hence you can see over there, what if we are having multiple several other methods after this method? Okay, so just because of that, we are not able to execute our program or terminate our program normally. So that is the reason we required what? Your exception handling code. Okay, we just want to handle this case. What if we got these such kind of exceptions, right? Like now after that, so till now we have an idea about that we always got exception during runtime, right? So we always got our exception during runtime. And as you can see over there, so this hierarchy is very important. So if somebody is going to ask you like which class contains all your errors and your exceptions classes, okay, so you will say that this is our throwable. So throwable is a super class of your exception and error, right? Similarly, exceptions, for exception, there is a separate class. For error, there is a separate subclass, right? And in exception, again, we have what IO exception, SQL exception. For network, you have network exception, right? Like that. Similarly, you have runtime exceptions. So you can all exceptions comes under your runtime, but still again in runtime they have categorized one more runtime exceptions kind like that. Okay, and remember this all runtime exception and your errors comes under the category of your unchecked exception. All exceptions comes under the category of unchecked exception. Unchecked exceptions are those exceptions which we cannot which our compiler cannot basically check. Okay, so that is why we call it as unchecked exceptions. But all other exceptions like our IO exceptions, our SQL exceptions, our network exceptions, all these all other exceptions we can, our compiler can check. Okay, so that is why these exceptions are known as what we call it as our checked exceptions, right? Like this. So there are, remember, like if we are getting our if we might get, so in that scenario, in runtime scenario, you will get exception only if whenever you are getting an exception. But for our checked exception, it might be possible you might not get, but still our compiler will alert us what if you will get some sort of exception. So that is why in that particular scenario you will get an error, compile time error. Remember this point, right? So that is the why. So we have also find out like what is the difference between exception and error. So errors are your irrecoverable. So means you cannot heal. So basically, majorly your errors are somehow related with our hardware. Okay, like your memory, your virtual memory error, stack overflow. All these comes under the category of your error. And suppose if you are getting some sort of error or exception, how to find out whether this is an runtime error or your exception? So here you can see over there. See, stack overflow error we have mentioned here. And here we are getting a message. The type of error is what? You're not error. This is what we are getting as an exception, right? Like this. So we have already know about what do you mean by checked exception and unchecked exception. Please don't get confused with checked exception and your unchecked exception. Remember, all exception occur at runtime, but in runtime also but in exception again they have categorized different types of your exception in one class that is known as your runtime exception. And those runtime exceptions are what your unchecked exception. Otherwise, all exceptions will occur at during runtime. But in order to make it like as I told you that compile time errors are better than your runtime errors, right? So that is why what they have done, they have made like, okay, these such kind of errors like this your file read error. See, in reality, let's assume we will not get any error related to this thing, but still what will happen, our compiler will display what an error, that okay, this exception you might get. So it's now what we have to do, you have to handle this exception. If you are not going to handle this exception, so I will not give you the permission to go for runtime execution, right? Like this. But for our unchecked exception, it will never, because in runtime exception, it will give you an error only when you are getting an exception. Only when, right? Only when you are getting an exception. So this is what that might occur like for, we have gone through like your null pointer exception, your arithmetic exception, array index out of bound exception, etc. like that, right? Like now we have also gone through the difference between checked and unchecked. So now I'm not going again revising these concepts now. So in our last class, we have started our this topic, that is your Java exception handling keywords. Okay, so we have already discussed about these two keywords. First one is your try keyword and second one is our catch keyword. So why we are basically working on these our keywords, why we are working on exception handling code. So this you should know, right? So whenever you are getting an exception, so what will happen? You know that you will get an exception, but still you are not handling it, right? So it means that your program will terminate abnormally, right? So that is the reason we have to handle these exceptions. What will you do if these such kind of exceptions you might get, right? Like that. So we have two keywords, okay? In order to handle your exception, you have two keyword. First one is your try keyword and second one is your catch keyword. So remember the code where you might get an exception. So the code which we generally call it as your risky code, we call that code named as what? As risky code. See, the statement where we might get an exception. So remember the place where you will feel like, okay, I might get some sort of exception over there. So it's better to put inside my try block. So try block will contain only those statements which might get, or it's better to put only those statements which are basically your risky code, okay, which are your risky statement. And how you are going to handle it, so for handling that particular thing, what you have to do, you have to use catch statement. So it will execute, this statement will execute only when you will get an exception. It's not like that if you are not getting any statement. Let's assume if I'm going to make 50 only, okay, so right now you will not get any exception, you are not getting any exception. So if I'm going to execute this code now, so I will get the output as Bennett 50 and then I will get what? University. So it will not execute this statement. So it will not execute this catch block. Why it will not execute this catch block? Because here we are not getting an exception. So this statement will get executed only if when you are getting an exception. And remember, this thing is again very important. As you can see over there inside catch block, so what I am basically writing, I am writing the name of this exception. So remember the exception which you are getting it, you have to write and you have to create a reference variable of this exception class, okay? For this exception class, so whatever the exception class you are getting it. So here you already know that because we have solved many problems related to this basically particular statement whenever we are writing 50 divided by 0, so we are getting arithmetic exception. So it is mandatory for us to write arithmetic exception. So I can show you again this hierarchy. Okay. So through this hierarchy, you will understand. See, we have to write down. See, either you have options, right? Either you can write arithmetic exception. I can write this inside my catch, arithmetic exception, because it is what kind of exception we are getting it when we are writing your 50 divided by 0 arithmetic exception. Either you can write what runtime exception. You cannot write siblings, but you can write parent class. So if you are not at all sure about okay what kind of exception I am getting, you have an idea about 50 divided by 0, you will get what your arithmetic exception. But for some other cases, let's for number format exception, you don't know the about the class of number format exception. So for that, what you will do, it's better to write what your runtime exception, right? Because this is a super class, so it will work. Similarly, again, if you have no idea about runtime exception, or you will get confused, okay, what exception I am getting? So it's better what you can do, you can directly write exception 2. Okay, you can write exception 2, so it will again work. So no issue at all. Remember this point. But it's better, always recommended to go for, if you have an idea about arithmetic, so directly write arithmetic, because right now we are getting only one exception. So what if we are getting multiple exception? So I will give you that scenario also. So it's whenever you don't have any idea, then only go for what this class. Otherwise, if you have an idea about okay, this exception comes under this class, like my runtime exception or arithmetic exception, so go for that much granule. Okay, don't go for like okay, I will broader view. Not don't go every time for broader view, because you might get an issue whenever you go for an broader view, right? Now we have gone through about your this try block and catch block, and remember your catch block will always our try block our this catch block will always follow try block. You cannot write first catch block and then try block. Remember this point. First you have to write try block and then only you will write catch block. And inside catch block, remember, if I'm going to write something, so I will give you some examples so that you will have a better understanding about that. So we have discussed this example yesterday, and you already know that, see, what output we are getting. Bennett, first statement it will display. See, here we are mentioning that this is our risky code, right? So now we are getting an exception too. And this exception, you already know that we are getting a and your arithmetic exception. So are we handling these such kind of exception? Yes, we are handling these such kind of arithmetic exception inside our catch block. So that is the reason what will happen. I will be able to print whatever the statement I'm writing over there. Okay. So that is the reason I'm getting Bennett 0 and then university. So basically remember this point that we are not basically solving this issue. We are never solving this particular issue. We are somehow solving some alternative way. We are figuring it out some alternative way, right? So this is an alternative way. We are not solving this issue. So remember, using exception handling, you are not solving that particular problem. So I have given you one example. Suppose you got some power cut, so you are not basically sorting out that problem on that particular transformer or your MCB. What you are doing, you are basically finding the alternative solution. So that, let's assume, you will find out okay, you can have an inverter, okay, for that example which I have already told you earlier, right? Like this. So here in this scenario we have find out the solution. Now remember, so if somebody will say that, sir, what will happen if I will put this statement inside try block? Inside try block. not this statement where I am getting an exception. Remember, again, what will happen? Again, I will get an exception over there. So this statement will not display. So I won't be able to display this statement. Why I won't be able to display this statement? Because I am not handling this exception, right? So always remember, you should know and you should aware about that in which statement you might get an exception, right? Like that. So remember, so this is basically the flow chart or when you are basically getting an exception. So suppose whenever we are getting an exception like int data 10 divided by 0, so you already know that an object of exception class is thrown, okay, all automatically. So this exception object our JVM will throw, okay, and then this exception object will check. So this is known as your decision box. So if you have an idea about your flow chart, so remember this your diamond box. We generally call it as what your decision box. So it will check whether we are handling this exception or not. So if you are handling this exception, then it will execute rest of the code. Okay. Otherwise, if you are not handling this exception, so again, like I have told you, like in one stack trace, like how so our default exception handler will work. Okay. So it will print the exception description, stack trace, and terminates the program. So here the termination is abnormal. Here your termination is normal. And we always want that our program termination should be normal, right? Like this. So you already know that about this thing, like it will always call your default exception handler. So I have again written this point so that again you will have an idea about that default exception handler will work only if when you are not handling your code, okay? When you are not handling your exception object. If you are handling that exception object, then your default exception handler will not work. But if you are not handling it, then it will work, right? Like this. Now the question, so I have covered all the possible cases, okay, so that you will have an idea about. So our so you know that in the first statement we are printing Bennett university, so everything is fine, okay? So we are not getting any statement, but still what we have done, because somehow let's assume you have no idea about your code and you don't know about anything, and you just figure it out, okay, it might be possible that I might get some runtime exception. So what you have done for these three statements, you put inside your try block, right? So these three statements are what your suspicious, or you can call it as your risky code, right? And for that you thought, because you don't have any idea like what kind of exception you might get. So that is why, see here what I have used a super class exception super class over there, right? Like this. And if I'm getting an exception, so I will handle it like this. And then I want to print my, this is my after whatever the statement I'm getting, right? Now, so here you can see over there, I am not getting any exception. So what will happen if I'm going to execute this code? So here you can see directly, I'm getting your Bennett University, and this for this line, I'm getting a blank line. And for this thing, I'm getting what? Greater Noida. So see here, my catch is, we are not executing our catch statement. Remember, so your catch statement will get executed only when you are getting an exception. Remember this point. Okay, this point is very important. So if somebody is going to ask you, what if you are not getting an exception? So that's great. It will work normally. But if we are getting an exception, then in that scenario, we are going to execute our catch statement only in that particular, right? Now, this is our second statement. Okay, this is our second statement. In this statement, you can see over there what we have done. We are not sure about. So right now, because we have already solved many problems related to 10 divided by 0, so we know that, okay, this is where we can get an exception. But let's assume that you have no idea. Okay, so suppose you are basically solving some expression c divided by d, and d for d is like a plus b plus something like that. Okay, and you don't know that you might get, sometimes you might get some the value of d as what your 0. Okay, in that, for that particular scenario, what you will do, because you don't know in which statement you might get an exception. Okay, you might get an exception. So what you will do, you will put all these statements inside my try block. So for us, all these statements are what my risky code. Okay, for all these statements are what my risky code, and I don't know like what kind of exception I might get. So that is why I'm not mentioning like arithmetic exception right now. So I will make it like a generalized thing. So that is why I make it as what my exception e is equals to, and I just want to execute this statement. Now, if I'm going to execute this code, remember this point is very important. So that is why I have added this case. Okay, I will tell you why I have added this case, because some of you are having the same doubt related to our case number 2. So if I'm going to execute this code, can anyone tell me what output I will get? Can anyone guess what output I will get? Yes?
Zero
Zero.
and greater Noida.
No, we will get only 0 and Greater Noida.
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. What about others?
Sir, Bennett 0, Greater Noida.
Okay, so one more answer I got, Bennett, right? 0 and then Greater Noida. What about others? Is there anyone who is basically getting different answer? Please let me know if anyone is getting different answer.
The Bennett 0, University, Greater Noida.
Okay, so I got, yeah. So I got 3 answer. First one, I'm just writing B, like for B, 0, University and Greater Noida. One answer I got 0, Greater Noida, and one answer I got Bennett. What 0, Greater Noida. So I got 3 answers. Remember this point for whenever you are writing this try block. So see how my JVM will execute this code. First of all, JVM will execute this statement. So I will get what? Bennett over there. Then it will execute this statement. So here what we are getting? We are getting an exception. So once we are getting an exception now, so it will terminate what my this entire try block. So it will terminate my entire try block, and it will go directly to my catch block, and it will check whether we are handling this exception. So yes, we are handling this exception. So it will print me what 0 over there, and then it will display Greater Noida. Right, so if we are going to execute this code, so this output we will get. Now what we have learned from this example, so always remember that please don't put your entire code inside your try block, because the statement from where you will get an exception, after that statement inside your try block, it will not execute those statements. So it's better to make that, hence length of try blocks should be less as possible, and take only risky code inside try block. Remember this point, this is very important. Otherwise it's better now for us, because we don't know what we will do. For our entire code we will put inside our try block. So whatever the statement, so we don't have to figure it out like in which statement we might get an exception, right? So the question that comes into your mind is, sir, what we will do for this scenario? Suppose we have a doubt in all these 3 statements, so it's better to use multiple try and catch block. So for this statement, what I will do, I will write one different what your try block. For this statement, I will write some different try block. For this statement, I will write some different try catch block. So I will have how many? 3 try and catch block for that. Why we are writing multiple your try block, try catch block? So that what will happen? Whatever the statement I am having after that. So you can see over there, I am not able to execute this statement, right? So automatically when the statement from where I'm getting an exception, so automatically it will terminate it. If for this scenario, if this will be our last statement, then yeah, we can say that yeah, it will work fine, no issue at all. But for our current scenario, we have to make this statement, okay, inside only this statement inside try block. It's better to put it. Otherwise, we won't be able to execute this statement. So remember, if somebody is going to ask you, like, it's better to write our entire code inside your try block, so that if you are getting an exception, so it will directly execute your catch block statement. So remember, no, because whatever the statement that are there after in your try block, so it won't so our JVM will not basically execute those statements, right? So this is very important. Now let's take third case, and this case is, so that's why I have covered all the cases, okay, so that whatever the doubt you will have, you will find out, okay, these are the scenarios, these are the possible cases that might occur whenever we are handling, whenever we are writing try and catch block, right? Now in this statement, what we have done, everything is fine, we have written try block for that, and see in the catch block what class I have used. Like, if we are getting a null pointer exception, but I can show you again that null pointer exception is not a super class. Remember this point? Yeah. So here null pointer exception is is a sibling of my arithmetic exception. It is not a super class of that. For arithmetic exception, I can use either arithmetic exception, either runtime exception, or either exception class. But I cannot use null pointer exception, number format sibling, or I cannot use IO exception, SQL exception like that. But here what I am doing, I am using sibling over there. Then what will happen if I am going to use a sibling over there? Like for this scenario, I am using null pointer exception. So automatically I will tell you that what will happen. So I will get an exception. So what our class will do, it will create an object. So the object which it will create an object of your arithmetic exception, right? Arithmetic exception. So it will create an object of our arithmetic exception. Remember, now this except after this exception, what it will do, it will go directly and it will ask main method, are you handling this exception or not? So my main will see in the catch statement and it will check whether whether I am handling this arithmetic exception or not. So here you can see over there, my catch block is handling null pointer exception. It is not handling your arithmetic exception. So after that, it will check and it will say my compiler, my main method will say to my JVM that, okay, I'm not handling this arithmetic exception. So again, it will terminate my main method. JVM will terminate my main method abnormally, and just before terminating my this main class, it will again handle my exception to my default exception handler. Okay, so if we are going to execute this code, see, I am getting Bennett, and see, now you have already have an idea about this message. So this message, who is displaying this message? My default exception handler. So remember that whatever the exception you are getting, okay, so you have to handle so for that particular class. So it's better if if you don't have any idea about, right? So whenever you are handling your exception, and if you have no idea about, okay, it comes under which class, whether it comes under your arithmetic exception class, runtime exception class, IO exception class, like that, it's better to put the super class of all the exception. That is what our exception class, right? So it's better to put what your exception, so that it will always work. because our runtime exception is a subclass of what our exception class, right? So it will work in that particular scenario. So always remember this point. So if you are getting these such kind of exceptions now, so how to handle it, and how many statements I should write inside my try block. It's not like that you can write whatever the n number of statements, your entire code inside your try block. Please don't put your entire code inside your try block. So whatever the risky code you are feeling like, okay, this might give you some sort of exception, so only that particular statement should comes under your try block, right? This is very important. Now let's take one more case. So if there is an exception in try as well as in catch, what if? So what will happen if you are getting an exception here, and suppose in your you don't know about 10 divided by 0, and again you have written 10 divided by 0, right? Then what will happen? Again you will get an exception over here. So what will happen? Again, you already know that it will execute my Bennett first. Okay, then we are getting an exception over there. So it my JVM will say, ask my main method, are you handling this exception or not? So it will check and it will say, yes, we are handling this exception, because your arithmetic exception is a subclass of your what child class of my exception class. So it will say that, okay, yeah, we are handling this exception. So it will execute my catch block. But inside my catch block, again, we will get an exception. So again, my JVM will ask, are you handling this exception? So my JVM will say no, because we are not using any try over there, right? So it will say that now we are not handling this exception. So again, it will terminate this method abnormally, and again, it will call my what is JVM, the default exception handler. So that is why I will get the output Bennett, and here I will get this my again exception in this particular case, this particular message I will get, right? So this is all about the cases related to our try and catch statement. So what we have learned so far is that related to our try and catch statement is that, first of all, you should have an idea about the exception classes, right? Like your arithmetic exception, your null pointer exception. So I'm not asking about that you should have an idea about all types of exception, but a generalized overview you should have an idea. And if you don't have any idea about the exception, like this particular exception belongs to which class, so always go for the parent class, okay? Like your exception class, it's better to write if you have no idea. If you have an idea, go for just write arithmetic exception. But if you have no idea, then go for your superclass. And whatever the risky code we are getting, only that particular risky code try to put inside your try block, right? Now again, one more important, while I haven't covered this particular case right now, that for one try statement, you can have multiple catch statement, right? For one try block, you can have multiple catch statement. So I will give you some example again for that particular scenario also. Now, so what we have learned so far is that within the try block, if anywhere an exception occur, then rest try would not execute. Remember, then the rest try would not execute even though we handle the exception. Hence, within the try block, we have to take only risky code, and the length of try block should be as less as possible. So you know the problem which we might face if we are basically putting our entire program inside our try block. So try to put your statement, your risky code as much less as you can right now. So in addition, other than try block, there may be a change of rising and exception inside catch and finally block. So we will discuss about finally block later on, no issue at all, but you might get an exception in catch block. Okay, don't say that, okay, we cannot get an exception in catch block. Yes, we can have an exception in catch block also. So I have also demonstrated you via one example that what if we'll get an exception in catch block. So again, we will get the same issue. Now, after that, if any statement which is not part of try block, and an exception occur, then it is always your abnormal termination. Remember this abnormal termination. So again, if you are not able to basically handle that particular exception, then we will get what kind of termination? Your abnormal termination. Now there are still, so in our Java, we have methods also, right? So I just want to give you an overview that what if you want to display that particular message? You already know that our default exception handler is printing some message, right? Like this message is who is basically executing our default exception handler. And now what we want, because we are getting this message, and when we are having a abnormal termination, because whenever default exception handler is playing a role, then it means we are getting a abnormal termination, right? But now what we want, instead of displaying something on our screen in our catch block, what we want to display this particular message, so how can we display this particular message without default exception handler, right? So for that we have our methods. So the methods what we have like this. So here in this scenario, again the example is same, so that you will not get confused. Okay, so I have taken the same example for that, and you got an exception over there. And now I just want to display what kind of exception I'm getting. See, I don't have an is basically. So that is why what I will do, if you want to display the same message which our default exception handler is displaying, just print this E. E is what you can call it as a reference variable, right? Which will refer what our this object, our exception object of this reference variable is of which class? Your exception class, our super class. So yes, we can have a parent class reference variable which is pointing out our child class. So you already have an idea about that part also. So that is why if we are going to execute this code, see what output we are getting. So it will display Bennett over there. So we are getting Bennett. Then after we will get an exception over there. So it will go directly into our catch block. And in catch block, what message we are printing? Our E. So in E, what we have? We have java.length.arithmetic exception divided by 0 greater Noida. So see here in this scenario, we are also, because we are getting a normal termination, because we are handling this exception, right, using catch block. Remember this point. So that is why we are also getting greater Noida. But in our earlier case, we are not getting greater Noida, because of our default exception handler, we will terminate our program just after this statement. But here in this scenario, we are handling it. Okay. But in our handling Java handling code, what we are doing, we are just displaying this message. So that is why we are getting what our this message. So if you just want to display that particular message, so what you can do, you can directly write E over there. Okay. Similarly, if you just want to display this message part, okay, not this entire thing, not this entire string, just you want to display a message. So what you can do, you can directly call E dot get message. So if you are going to write E dot get message, so it will display us what? Divide by 0. Only this part it will display, right? Divide by 0. So you are getting an exception just because of divide by 0. And if you just want to display your entire stack trace also, but because here you can see over there, we are not displaying any stack trace. Okay, we are just displaying the name of exception and its description. But if you want to display the entire thing, okay, like the stack trace also, so what you do, you just call this method that is known as what your that is known as your e dot print stack trace, right? So it will display our entire thing, e java dot lang dot arithmetic exception, divide by 0, and at where we are getting in this exception at your main method, right? So this basically, yeah, this is the case which is similar to what our default exception handler basically displaying that particular exception, right? So this is equivalent to that. And these are what where you just want to display name and divide by zero. So it's up to you that how do you basically want to basically execute this case, right? So these are the methods. So you should know that suppose if you don't want to handle, you don't want to write your own code, you just want to display what kind of exception you are getting. So it depends upon the application, like for which application you want like these such kind of message you want to display, right? Like that. Now, a try with multiple catch block. So I just want to show you some cases also. So remember, like with one try, you can have multiple catch block, but it's not like that you can directly write try after try. You cannot write after that. Always remember your try should be followed by either your catch block or your final block. If you are just writing try block na, in your code, you will get an error. So it is mandatory to write either catch block or finally block after that. So no issue. We will discuss about finally block also. Now here in this scenario, what we have one try block and we have multiple catch block. Now why we are writing multiple catch block? So that because suppose so in some scenarios you are not sure about what kind of exception you might get. Okay, so if you are getting that particular exception, so it should display this, it should display this statement. If you are getting that particular statement, you can call it, then it will display this particular statement. So if you want these such kind of scenarios, okay, so it's in that particular scenario, what we will do, we will always go for multiple catch block, right? So here in this scenario, what will happen if we are getting 10 100 divided by 0? So again, you already know that this comes under the category of what your arithmetic exception. So remember that it will not execute all your catch block. So it will execute the topmost catch block, which where it is basically meeting it, okay, meeting the particular criteria. So whether it is an arithmetic exception, so you already know that this is an arithmetic exception. So that is the reason it will directly display me what Bennett message over there. See, it will not display me university. Why it is not displaying me university? Because you can execute only one catch block. It's not like that you will catch you will. So the place where basically it is meeting the criteria. So here you can see, you can ask, sir, it is meeting the criteria of both the exception, right? Because if even if I'm writing only this catch block also now, so it will, in that scenario, it will give me or display me this message, university only. But right now we have written two catch block and our this no, exception object is meeting the criteria of both the classes. But remember the topmost class, it will execute or it will execute which catch block? The topmost catch block, right? So that is why you will get an output that is known as what your bandit over. Now in the second case, you can see over here, this is very important, okay? This thing is very important because I have seen like students generally get confused and they will say that, sir, the output for our second case should be university. Okay, so instead of second case, first let's talk about third case. Okay, so after that I will discuss about second case. So in the third case, what we have try block and we have catch block, right? And in the catch block, what we have arithmetic exception. Again, I have written multiple arithmetic exception block. Okay, so for this particular catch, sorry, for this particular try block, I have written two catch block, and in both the catch block, what I'm using the same class reference variable. Okay, I'm handling the same exception, you can call it. So whenever you are writing these such kind of catch block, now see, I'm using the same class, arithmetic exception. So in that scenario, you will get a compile time error. Always remember, you will get an compile time error. So always remember, either your exception should be different, right? It should not be same. And one more case is that always remember, whenever you are writing catch block now, don't write first parent class exception and then write your child class. In that particular scenario, also you will get a compile time error. So in this scenario, you already know the hierarchy. First you have exception class, then you have what? You have runtime exception class, and then you have what? Your arithmetic exception class, right? Arithmetic exception class. So here what we are doing in our catch block, whenever we are using multiple catch blocks, so these are the cases which you should always consider, okay? Don't write first superclass exception catch, and then don't and if you are writing the subclass, then again you will get an error. So the perfect way to write it is first write your subclass and then write your superclass, right? So because if why we are getting a compile time error, because that question should come into your mind, is that, sir, why we are getting these such kind of error? So remember this point, my exception is my superclass. So always it will execute this statement only. So it will never execute this case. Why it will execute this case? Because this is a superclass and all the exception classes comes under my this catch block, okay? This exception class. So it will always execute this exception class. So why we are writing this basically statement? So it will never execute this catch statement. Remember? So is there if I hope that you understand that it will never execute this catch statement, because it will always execute this, because all the exceptions comes under this class, right? So that is why you will get an error. So remember that whenever you are writing multiple catch statement, so remember that it should maintain the hierarchy. So first of all, you have to write your child classes, and then you have to write your parent class. Because for this particular case, let's assume you are not getting arithmetic exception, then in that scenario it will execute what your this particular exception class catch block. But here in this scenario, whatever the exception you are getting it will always execute this statement. Similarly, for this scenario also, if you are getting an arithmetic exception, so it will always execute this statement. Why it will execute this statement, right? So because of this conflict, right? So that is why in these two type cases, we will always get an, you can say that we will always get an exception. So the error which we'll get over there is exception arithmetic has already been used for this case, right? Like this. And here also exception arithmetic exception has already been used. Why we are getting an exception? Because see, exception class, because arithmetic is a subclass of my this exception class. So that is why we are getting an error over there, because in here also we have used arithmetic exception, because all the exception comes under my this class that is known as my exception class, right? So always remember, if you are working on multiple catch block, so remember this point, that it should maintain this particular hierarchy, that child classes should come first, then your parent, right? Like that. Now, let's go for our next. So the way of handling an exception is varied from exception to exception. Hence, for every exception type, it is highly recommended to take separate catch blocks. Okay, so when to go for multiple catch block? So you already know that what if you want you are getting multiple, you can say that your exception. So if you are getting that particular exception, you just want to display that particular case, right? So in that scenario, you can use try with multiple catch block. And this is very important, that at a time only one exception is occurred, and at a time only one catch block is executed. And if you are having multiple catches, it's not like that all the catch block will get executed for that particular exception, right? Like this. Now, limitation is order of execution is very important, which I have already mentioned. Okay, so always remember that order of execution is very important when having multiple catch, because first we will take child first and then parent exception. Remember this time. If we take parent exception first and then child exception, you will surely get a compilation error. This is very important statement, right? So I have covered all the cases, okay? So related to our try and catch block, right? Like this. So I'm just giving you one more example, like if you have to perform different tasks at the occurrences of different exception using, so I've just giving you one more example. See, for this particular case, suppose you don't have any idea about, okay, what kind of exception you might get over there, right? So for this, let's make it as A4 so that you will have a better understanding. So suppose you have no idea, okay, what kind of exception I am getting it over there. So you already have an idea about, first of all, whenever you are executing your code, first of all, your RHS part will gets executed and then your LHS part will gets executed because we are assigning this value, right? So here initially so you have no idea whether for this case you will get a arithmetic exception that is divided by 0, or you will get first array index out of bound exception. Or if you have no idea, so you have written one more catch block for entire exception like that. Okay. So in that scenario, what will happen if you are going to execute this code, then the output which you will get over there is first, because you already know that our JVM will execute our RHS part, right? So here you will get an exception. So once you will get an exception, and it will create an object, and that object name, object of which class? Your arithmetic exception class, right? So it will check in the catch block, are we handling that particular object? So yes, in this catch block we are handling this particular exception. So that is why we will get the output as what? Task 1 completed, right? And it will not execute other catch block, and it will directly execute my this statement, and I will get the output as what? My rest of the code, right? Like this. And in the second case, you can see over there, now this RHS part is okay, but in the LHS part, you already know that the size of my array is what? 5. But remember, array size will start from where? My 0, okay? So, but here I am accessing A of 5, means I am accessing which indexing? I am accessing 6th indexing. Remember this point, okay? Don't get confused, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, like this. So this is what the size of my array, but here I am assigning this value here in A of 5, but it is not there in my array. So it will create an exception object of which of which class? Your array index out of bound exception class, right? So now it will check whether we have whether we are handling in this exception. No, in this catch block we are not handling this exception. Yes, here we are handling this exception. So it will execute this particular catch block, and it will execute this statement, and you will get the output as task 2 is completed, and then rest of the code, right? Like this. And you can have Java nested try block too, where the try block within a try block. So you can write try block within a try block. So you already have an idea about nested for loop, nested while loop. Similarly, here also you can have a nested try block also, right? Like that. So I can give you one example. So in this example, you can see this try block. Inside this try block, again, I have written one more try block, right? And see, two try blocks are there. Two try blocks are there inside this try block. So how my program will execute? First of all, it will go here and it will execute this statement. That is why you are getting the output going to divide, right? Now, after this statement, because in this statement you are getting, so always remember, first your innermost try block will get execute, okay? So it will give me what? An object over there. Are we handling this arithmetic exception? Yes, we are handling this arithmetic exception. And here we are displaying this message because we are just writing E over there, right? So we will get this output. Now, after that, again, we will execute this statement. Again, we are getting an exception over there in this statement, right? So are we handling it? Yes, we are handling it. Again, it will display me a message here over here. Now, after that, it will display what? Other statement, right? Now after that, are we getting any exception over there? No, we are not getting any exception. So that is why it will not execute any this catch statement. Remember, because right now we don't have any exception object, because whatever the exception we are getting, we have already handled those exceptions, right? So that is why it will not execute this case, and it will directly execute, and we will get what? Your normal flow, right? So this is all about our today's class. So in our today's class lecture, we have covered our entire try and catch block. So whatever the possible cases, whatever the cases that might occur when we are going for try and catch block. So in our next class, we are going to discuss about finally block. So what is the need of finally block? So we will discuss it in our Thursday lecture. And remember, in Thursday, you will have a quiz too of 10 minutes. Okay, so just like in the beginning of our lecture, I can take that particular quiz, okay, of 10 or 10 to 15 minutes, no issue at all. So we will send you message, okay, if we
It will be on Thursday.
yeah, Thursday.
Okay,
Thursday
sir.
you have a lecture, na?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in Thursday lecture, there will be a quiz, okay, like we have conducted like quiz number 1. So you will get only 10 questions, okay, no issue at all. So the questions are quite simple. So I hope that there is a very high probability that if you know the concept, so we will send you a mail, like in the noon, most probably we'll send you a mail so that you will find out what are the topics that are there for your quiz number 2. Right. So this is all about our today's lecture. Yes. Is there anyone who is having any doubt? Please, you can ask.